Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is May 29th, 2022, and you are now watching and listening to Real Talk with Ronnie. My name is Ronald Lynn, the host of the fastest growing political talk show in New Jersey. Here on Real Talk with Ronnie, we only engage in real talk, real news in real time. We are now broadcasting on Salem Radio via AM 970. Catch us here every Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. To learn more about our show, visit our show's website at www.realtalkronnie.com. realtalkronnie.com. If you want to come on our show, have a guest in mind, or just want to reach out, please email us at realtalkwithronnie@gmail.com. realtalkwithronnie@gmail.com. One more thing, please visit my campaign website at www.winwithlynn.us to learn more about me, my campaign for Bergen County Commissioner, and how you can get involved. My primary is on June 7th. It's coming up, so please vote for me and column 2. We've got a great show tonight, as always. Here on our show, we bring you real talk with some of the most interesting and biggest names in politics, culture, and society, and we literally talk about everything. Tonight on our program, we welcome Mr. Russell Protentis, former ATF and Immigration and Customs and Enforcement agent assigned to the Drug Enforcement Agency from 2003 to 2008. But he's been serving as a federal officer for more than 30 years. During the course of our show tonight, we will listen to some of his amazing undercover operations involving Columbian cartels, the seizure of thousands of pounds of marijuana and cocaine, as well as millions of dollars in drug money. We will also learn about the time Russell helped nab 2 Chinese spies in their quest to secure sensitive missile technology at the behest of the Chinese government. Such fascinating stuff. Russell is the author of the book Flight of the Westwind, which details one of his largest drug busts. And as if Russell doesn't have enough on his plate, he is also currently a Republican candidate for a state Senate seat in the great state of Massachusetts. What a guy and what a show we have on tonight. So sit back, relax, and allow me to bring on Real Talk with Ronnie, Mr. Russell Protentis.
Bitter. Maybe you taste different. Hold up, babe.
All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Real Talk with Ronnie. Thank you for listening to us and watching us. We are airing live right now on AM 970 on Salem Radio. So if you want to tune in on Sunday nights, please tune in by going to www.am970theanswer.com and click on the Listen Live button. Or you can just search for us on AM 970 every Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. On my show tonight, we're very happy and honored to have Mr. Russell Protentis join us on our program tonight. Russ, thank you for coming on.
Ron, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Great. Now, Russ, you have a very interesting background, right? You were a former ATF ICE officer. You've been on a bunch of, crazy missions, right? And we're going to talk about those later. You also wrote a book, right? And we're going to talk about the contents of your book as well. But before we get to all that, why don't you tell us about yourself, about your background, and everything there is to know about Russ?
Okay, I'll do the best I can in the time we have. I was born in Brockton, Massachusetts. I am the eldest of 4 boys, born to a mother who was a Jewish concentration camp survivor from Würzburg, Germany, and emigrated here when she was 6.5 years old and didn't speak one word of English. Just to tell you a little bit about some of the traits I inherited from her, she started school speaking only German. The only word she knew in English was thank you. And she graduated high school at 15 and a half without a tutor, without any instruction. She just drove herself to excel because of the opportunities afforded to people when they come here from a totalitarian, repressive government, and they live here in a free society like we have in the United States.
Right. Wow. So she graduated at 15 years old from high school.
Correct.
Wow. So your mom must have been a prodigy, huh?
Yeah, she was. And she met my dad when he was working at a shoe company in New York. Endicott Johnson, and he was a salesman and also worked in the copy room. And she would run into him once in a while. And he was a Greek immigrant, signed up for the service at the age of 16 and a half with a forged birth certificate that he paid $10 for, and served honorably in the South Pacific, was wounded during a kamikaze attack on his troop transport vessel. And they got married on their lunch break.
Wow. Okay.
So they went to see a justice of the peace, and my mother grew up in the Orthodox tradition of the Hebrew religion, and so they weren't able to tell her mother for about 6 months. So the marriage remained secret until they got over the shock of their daughter marrying outside the faith.
Yeah, because I'm sure your grandmother from your mother's side wanted your mom to marry like a nice Jewish boy, right?
Right, a nice Jewish boy. That's right, like a doctor, a lawyer, or something. Yeah,
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
What they got instead was a Greek salesperson.
Absolutely, who became her product, who became my grandmother's favorite son, even more so than her own children.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, so he really ingratiated himself to them, and they loved him, and he treated my grandmother like his own mother. And so from there, they moved up to Brockton, Massachusetts. He received an opportunity to continue his sales of shoes up here in Massachusetts, but then transferred to a clothing manufacturing company and became the top salesman at this Madewell Manufacturing, which was based out of New Bedford, Massachusetts. And he was very successful there. He helped build the company from the ground up. So that's their story. And from a very young age, I chased two goals. One was to be a professional baseball player. And the second was, after watching the Sunday episodes before you were born, and probably most of your audience, it was the FBI starring Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. And I was enthralled by those guys in suits and jackets chasing down bank robbers and mass murderers. And I said, geez, that's something I might want to do. So I pursued that career and gave up baseball for a career as a federal agent.
Okay. So you had two choices. Well, not two choices. So you had two wants as a little boy, right? You wanted to either be a baseball player or an FBI agent, which I think, was, I mean, that's those are two pretty popular, career choices, right?
Yes, they are.
But you ultimately chose the latter route, and you became a federal agent. Now, did you actually work for the FBI or?
No, I never, an opportunity arose before I even got to that point. My parents were very involved, especially my mother, in the education portion of my life. And she researched the university I went to, which is Northeastern, located in Boston. Mm-hmm. And she saw they had a cooperative education program that would allow you to go into a 5-year undergraduate program, but also gain experience in the major that you were studying. So I took that opportunity, and at the same time, I enrolled there, and they had tryouts for the JV baseball team and freshman baseball team in September when I first started the school, and I did very well in the tryouts, and I was invited to come back in the spring. So at that time too, I had applied for a co-op position with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. And I'll tell you a funny sideline to the story, Ron. When I interviewed for the position, diversity was just starting to rear its head in our society. And not that it's a bad thing, but I went into the co-op advisor. I heard about the position at ATF, and he said, yeah, Russ, I'll send you on the interview, but they, due to their diversity program, are going to be hiring a female for the first co-op position. They've already sent several others there, several other candidates, and they filled the positions, but now they are definitely requiring a woman. you can go for the interview for the experience, but I can't guarantee that it'll be anything but a nice experience for you. So I saw the opportunity. It was a chance to interview with a federal agency, and I figured I would make the most of it. So the interview was set up for about a week later at the JFK building in Boston, Massachusetts, which is in the government center. So I took it upon myself to learn about ATF. I had never heard about them before.
Right.
So
And for the listeners and viewers who are watching and listening tonight, so can you explain the ATF? Is it like a branch that's under the FBI, or is it its own separate thing?
it's its own separate agency created by executive order, and under the Treasury Department initially. Now they are under the Justice Department, and it become almost like a branch of the FBI. But their original foundation was based on the old alcohol tax agency, which monitored liquor plants and made sure that the taxes were paid on each bottle of liquor that left the distillery. And then they morphed into a more progressive agency that started taking into account gun control, explosives investigations, and explosives relating to terrorist organizations, which the United States was encountering a little bit of in the early 70s with the Weathermen and some of the underground radical groups. So they were created basically by executive order, but now they are part of the Justice Department and work hand in hand with the FBI.
Okay. So ATF stands for alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, right?
Correct. Right.
Okay. Please continue.
Okay. So I said that, geez, I don't know anything about this agency. I know about the FBI, but I've never heard of this other agency. So I took a trolley ride in. I was living on campus at Northeastern, and went to their headquarters office for New England in the JFK building on the 19th floor. And I went in, saw the receptionist there, and I said, do you have any information on your agency? I'm doing some research. So she gave me about 10 different booklets with some of their highlighted cases involving domestic terrorism, and also what they're doing as far as enforcing the gun control laws of the United States. And so I took those books home and I made that my assignment. So for the next week, I immersed myself in everything to do with ATF. And
that was pretty smart, going to the actual, office and asking them for their information.
Right. And she was very, very cordial, and we would meet again eventually. So I took the books back. I studied them, memorized statistics about the amount of alcohol tax collected in the course of a year. They also collected the cigarette tax for tobacco on the federal level, and some of their highlighted cases. So now my interview was coming up the following week, and I would be interviewed by the special agent in charge and the deputy special agent in charge. And I had no idea what to expect. I had interviewed for security positions and other offhanded jobs, but never in a formal setting like that.
And this would have been your first job right out of college, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So I arrived about half hour early. I waited in the reception area, and who was there but the receptionist who gave me all the information. She said, "Oh, I recognize you. You were here doing some research." And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Were the books helpful?" I said, "They were immensely helpful, but I'll find out how helpful in a few minutes when I go in."
Right.
So she escorted me into the conference room, and I remember walking into that big conference room where they would hold their meetings or briefings before arrests, and the table seemed like it was 40 feet long, and the agent in charge was sitting at one end and the deputy agent in charge was sitting right next to him, and I was at the far end of the table. It seemed like they were like a million miles away from me, and of course I was extremely nervous. So they asked me to sit down. I did, and I was waiting for them to start the interview. And as good fortune would have it, the good Lord was looking out for me. The agent in charge asked me a question. He said, well, we've had a lot of candidates come in here for interviews. We'd like to know, what do you know about ATF? And it was like the door opened, and I received the grand prize, because for 20
And it was also the easiest question, right? Because for the past week, that's all you've been doing.
That's all I've been doing. I gave them the amount of revenue that they collected every year.
Right.
I gave them 3 of their biggest cases that they had, and the inception of the agency going all the way back to the Elliott Ness days. And they stopped me after 20 minutes and said, well, kid, you've thoroughly impressed us. We've had several people come in here. They don't even know anything about the agency, never mind 1/10 of what you've just spouted off. So they said, we are criminal investigators, and we investigate. And you have done your job investigating. You've proven to us that you know how to investigate. So unfortunately, we're bound by requirements of our headquarters. We have to fill the next cooperative education position, the 6-month time slot, with a female. However, we will not have interviews for the rest of the year, and we will take you on with the co-op term after that for 3 months. And we will close the interviews from Northeastern, and you will be hired for the next co-op term in the following spring. So I hit the mark. I hit a home run.
That's great.
Yeah.
So you were basically assured that for the following term you would have that job, right?
Correct.
And after you had, so I mean, was this considered like a internship at that point, or
it was a paid cooperative education employment? So I actually received federal benefits, the health insurance policy. Right. I accrued time toward retirement if I should stay with the federal government, and I was paid at a low level of the GS salary rate, a GS4. But they offered me, and I took advantage of it, as much overtime as I wanted. I could go out on surveillances. The day job I had during the co-op term was Monday, and it was going over records of multiple purchases of firearms. And it was just cross-referencing records to see if somebody had a felony conviction. But I thrived for the night and the weekends because I would volunteer to go out in the undercover buys, the surveillances. There were several bombings that took place that summer. The Jonathan Jackson Melville group was making a statement against the United States government, and they set off explosives which blew up an American Airlines jetliner at Logan Airport, the Suffolk County Courthouse, the Newbury Courthouse, and they tried to blow up the state police barracks in Topsfield, Massachusetts. So I got to go out on all those things on the weekend.
And while you were doing all this, you were accruing credit for your class studies too, right?
Correct.
Okay, great. Okay, so after you graduated from Northeastern, I guess that's when you went on to work for the ATF as a full-time employee, right?
Correct, but it wasn't as easy as it sounds. I graduated, and Jimmy Carter had just put a freeze on federal hiring because the government was trying to cut back on expenses. So I had 120 days of eligibility from the date of my graduation to be hired by ATF non-competitively.
Right.
That would mean without an exam or further interview process, but the clock was ticking. I had exactly 4 months, and I was sitting around doing not much of anything during the summertime, working a few part-time jobs, and my mother saw me in the kitchen one day, and she said, "What are you doing about pursuing your job as a federal agent?" I said, "Well, I'm just waiting." She goes, "No, you're not going to wait. You're going to do something." She said, "You're going to start writing letters." So she directed me to write a letter to Ed Brooke, who was a junior senator at the time in Massachusetts, Ted Kennedy, Tip O'Neill, the Speaker of the House, and also Jimmy Carter, who was the president. So I wrote all four a letter saying I have a dream, and my dream is being curtailed by a freeze on federal hiring. So as time passed, I got return letters from Kennedy, Tip O'Neill, and Brooke. "Oh, we're looking into the matter, and yeah, it's a difficult time, and there's a freeze on hiring, and hopefully it will be lifted one day." The letter that came from the office of the President of the United States said, "We are investigating the matter and we will resolve it to your satisfaction." I was
Wow.
shocked. I was shocked. It was so different than the other letters, which
Right.
are form letters. And so now I was running into day 90, day 100, and the agent in charge kept in contact with me. His name was Arthur Monturi. And he said, "We're trying to do our best to lift the freeze, but there's no budget." So day 115 came, and I opened up. I was living with my parents. I went to their mailbox, and I saw a letter from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. And I opened it up, and it was from the office of the President of the United States. And it stated, "We have looked into this matter, and it has been resolved to your satisfaction. You will attain your dream, and you will be a special agent."
Oh, wow.
That's day 115. So within an hour of receiving that letter, which is about 10 o'clock in the morning, I get a call from the agent in charge of the Boston office of ATF. And Arthur Monturi said to me, "Kid, I've got something here on my desk. It has nothing to do with why you were hired. I got it done for you. We don't like letter writers. We don't want letter writers working for federal agents." I said, "Yes, sir, I understand." He said, "Did you write a letter?" And I said, "Yes." I was desperate. He goes, "You don't need letters. I got it done. I lifted the freeze for you," which I knew was a bunch of crap, but I just went along with it. And I said, "Sure, sir. Thanks very much. You got me hired. Thank you very much." But as it turned out, it was Jimmy Carter's office.
Well, obviously, right? So the president of the United States at the time basically just made a call to the ATF and basically said, "All right, you have the green light to hire this kid, Russ."
Right.
And that's all it took.
Right.
Wow. So thank God your mom gave you that great idea, right?
Absolutely. And then if you read my book, a bit of a sequel, I'll give you a little hint to what's in the book. About 4 years later, I was assigned as a treasury agent. We would help the Secret Service in the campaign years every 4 years because they don't have enough agents to cover all the candidates that receive matching federal funds, the foreign dignitaries that come into the United States. So we go for a 3-day training course prior to the campaign season, and then we would help them out, as they would call us other treasury agents. And we'd be in peripheral assignments, not the main motorcade or the main protection detail. So I got assigned to a detail that would include a visit from Jimmy Carter to the north end of Boston. And it was at the KFC. And I asked a friend of mine with the Secret Service, Kenny Bradshaw, who was in charge of the detail. I said, "Kenny, the president's coming in. I would like to thank him in person for something he did for me." He said, "Okay, Ross, I'll put you near the holding room." Now, a holding room is a room that's secured where the candidate or protectee is brought to prepare his speech, or if there's an emergency, or prior to having to go out the back door, if there is some kind of emergency, he's brought to that room. So I got that assignment. And lo and behold, Jimmy Carter came for his visit, and I got to hold the door open for him as he went into the holding room. And I thanked him. I said, he said, "How are you, son?" And I said, "Well, sir, I want to thank you. I'm here because of you. And you lifted the freeze on federal hiring." He gave me a little smile. And he said, "You're welcome, son. Glad I could help." But I got to thank the man who got me hired.
Right. Well, I mean, in all honesty, he probably never even saw that letter, right? It was his staff who read it. But yeah, I mean, it was great that his office was able to help you out there.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. So
Wow.
a little bit of divine intervention.
Yep. So and also, mother knows best, right? Because your mother told you to write that letter.
Absolutely, she sure does. Yep. Yep.
All right. So Russ, I'm looking at your bio here, and you've had a lot of extensive experience, right? And you've went on like a lot of crazy missions. So I'd like to talk about some of those missions. Before we go into that, why don't you tell us what are some of the most memorable missions and cases that you worked on?
Geez, Ron, there were so many great investigations that I had the chutzpah that my mother gave me and the determination and drive that my dad did. And I I went after my job a different way. With ATF, I worked some rather mundane cases, some significant ones, some not that significant. But then when I went to customs, I really fell into my niche because the drug war was in full bloom. And I knew that in order to be a successful agent during this time period, when President Reagan had declared the war on drugs, you had to have informants. Without an informant, you're just going to get lucky one day and maybe stumble into a couple of kilos of heroin or maybe a stash of cocaine in a car or something like that. But I wanted to try and get into the stage where I would initiate things. So I befriended the head of the parole commission in Boston. His name was Tom Wiedock. And I would visit Tom and get lists of boat captains and airplane pilots that were on federal parole. And so I would monitor their travel. In the customs database, we have what's called the Treasury Enforcement Communication System. You could plug a name in and you can track somebody to see if they travel internationally. So I figured that would be a good start. Now, I know the way pilots love to fly and they're not just going to stand by and do nothing. So I started looking at a few of the pilots he gave me the names of. And lo and behold, within a month or a month and a half, two of the pilots entered Puerto Rico from Santo Domingo. And so now you've got two pilots who were on federal parole, convicted felons, flying together and leaving the country without permission, all of which would result in them maybe having to go back for the full term of their sentence, which could be another 3 to 6 years. So I went to the parole commissioner, Tom, and I told him what I had found. And he said, Russ, both these guys did time for flying in drugs. It was specifically marijuana, and they got 14 months, and they got early reprieves because they taught a flight instruction school. So if you ever saw the movie Blow with Johnny Depp, he and Carlos Slater teach a flight instruction school.
Right.
And then, of course, and just like you saw in the movie, every one of the prisoners doesn't graduate, and they ask them, come and fly for us when you get out. So they'll never figure out how to operate an airplane. So anyways, they were skilled. They had the names of a lot of people who had done time with them. And so I asked Tom if he could work with me and delay them reporting back to prison and give them a chance to work off their parole violation. So he agreed. And I set up on the first one. His name was Dennis, and he lived on Cape Cod. And I didn't want his attorney to get involved because that always messes things up. So I sat outside his house for a week. And finally, on day number 5, he showed up in a yellow Jaguar and got out of his car, started walking into his condominium. And I approached him with my badge. And he said, oh, I've been waiting for you. I knew somebody was going to be coming. And he said, what do you want? And I said, no, it's what you want. Do you want to stay out of prison? And he said, yes, I do. And he gave me a list of about 30 names of people that wanted him to fly drugs for them. So I waited for the second pilot, who had a little bit different path to his life. Dennis was a commercial pilot that flew charters. The other pilot was a decorated Vietnam veteran. He shot down one of the first MiGs over North Vietnam in 1968. And if you go in your town in New York to the USS Intrepid, which is right near the Circle Line, it's a floating museum aircraft. And on the deck, and I didn't find this out till 2000 when I was doing a Secret Service detail there for Bill and Hillary Clinton. This other pilot, his jet that was utilized in that air combat is on the deck of the Intrepid, and underneath the canopy is inscribed his name, Lieutenant Anthony Joseph Nargi, and a red star with the date 9/1968. So this guy was a pilot beyond all pilots. I mean, he's skilled, a skilled fighter. You know, Top Gun type of a guy, took chances and graduated number one in his class, didn't obey any of the rules, and was kind of like a renegade. But he too got in trouble after he was in the service and started flying marijuana or get caught.
So wait, Russ, let me ask you. So these two pilots, right?
Yeah.
How were they recruited by like these cartels to fly these drugs in?
Well, they both were known as skilled pilots.
Right.
The second one was, of course, a lot more skill, and they would fall into the circles. At that time, it was wide open back then, Ron. If you ever watch that series that's on TV, Cocaine Cowboys, I don't know if you've ever seen that documentary, but
I've heard about it. Yeah,
it's wild. I mean, the United States was wild. You could bring anything in anywhere. You could fly an airplane in with 500 kilos of coke on it. Nobody would pay any attention because nobody was looking for it.
Right.
And so these pilots would fall into a crew of people, and somebody would say, "Hey, can you do this for us?" Well,
and how much would these pilots get paid to fly these loads in?
If it was marijuana, 50,000
for like each flight.
For each flight, yeah.
Wow.
And for cocaine, between 3,000 and 4,000 per kilo. So wow. you figure somebody's flying in 300 kilos at that kind of money. The pilot's going to make about $1.2 million.
Wow. And how do these pilots get paid? Like, is it through like a wire transfer or cash only, or
cash? And if you read my book, when you go through my book, and if some of your listeners read it, you'll see how they were paid. Usually in a paper bag with money or a gym bag.
So this served as a pretty good, it was like a pretty good part-time gig.
Oh, for sure it was. Yeah. The secret was getting paid, though. They would often string the pilots along, and they'd be the last ones paid. And they would keep holding out, saying, "Oh, we'll pay the next flight. We'll pay the next flight." They just give them enough to keep them going and kind of shortchange them. So that's why a lot of pilots would eventually become informants for the feds because they never got paid.
Now, do some of these pilots end up dead?
Oh yeah. If you read my book, it tells about one escapade of a pilot who had gone back to the same organization that he had testified against, and he didn't make it back out of there alive. Wow. It was a very, very gruesome death.
But I mean, these pilots that testified, aren't they protected under federal protection, or?
They could be if they chose that path, but a lot of times they're pilots. They're used to taking chances. They'll keep going, and they got a chance to make money with the federal government. In the first case I did in my book that I wrote about, the first air smuggling case, the pilots could have each made $120,000 working for the government. So you're working legitimately for $120,000. So, and they like the excitement. Most of the pilots need that adrenaline fix. So the second pilot, he was recruited because his business in the Caribbean failed, and somebody who knew about his business went to him and said, "Hey, I can get your business out of trouble if you make a few flights as your maker for me." And so they end up known as a good pilot, and they end up getting hired. So the idea is not to be stupid, and sometimes they get too greedy or they get a little too lax, and
right.
We don't catch the smart ones. We catch the dumb ones.
Right. So anyway, so you went to the second pilot, and he said, cooperate, right?
Yeah, he said, Russ, he said, "I dishonored my country. I was a war hero. I want a chance to earn my integrity back, and I'll do anything I can for you guys to earn my reputation back." And he did. He did it. When you read the book, you'll see what the chances he endured and what he went through to bring that aircraft back with that cocaine. It was absolutely amazing.
Okay, so because of this one case, I think here it said that you guys seized over 10,000 pounds of cocaine, right, and $3 million in cash.
Well, in that case, it was 600 kilos of cocaine, a $4 million jet, and about $250,000 cash. That was at the time, Ron, that was the largest seizure of cocaine from a private aircraft in United States history.
Now, let me ask you. So what do you guys do with all this extra coke and cash?
Well, with the cash, we developed a system. It was called trafficker funds, where we would take the money from the drug dealers and then use it to investigate them. We put it in a special fund, which is monitored by that, at the time, U.S. Customs headquarters. All the funds go through. You have to have receipts for everything, even if it's just for a toll. But we were all driving rental cars. We all had cell phones. We had the fanciest equipment because now we didn't have to go to the government for funding, which takes forever to get.
Right.
We had the drug dealers funding us. So in the second case that I worked, we seized over $1.3 million. That was ours. That went into our group in Boston to use for investigation.
Now, could you guys use this money to like give yourself bonuses?
No, we couldn't do it. I wish. If it was, I wouldn't have to write books. Yeah.
Okay. Well, what about the coke and like the extra coke you guys find?
The cocaine is taken to an incinerator. We used to use one up in Lynn, Massachusetts, which burns at about 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. And we would just throw kilo by kilo into the pit.
So you guys would literally be burning all this valuable, precious
cargo. Yeah.
Cargo. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
And the jet we put to work and it auctioned off. I think it was an Israeli-made Westwind jet, and it sold for about $3.7 million.
And that money is kept by the ATF, right?
By U.S. Customs, correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, whenever there's a big bust like this, where there's like thousands of pounds of drugs being seized and money being taken, there's got to be heads rolling from the cartels, right? Like people are dying, right?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. In the second two air smuggling cases, I used the same informant. He was outstanding. He had nerves of steel. He went to a meeting with the Rodriguez brothers, who were the head of the Cali cartel, and they threatened him, and he pulled a penknife out of his pocket and held it to one of their necks. And they said, "This guy's got balls." And so they gave him the job to fly in 2 loads of cocaine. And one was 1.7 tons. The other one was over 2 tons of cocaine. But it was the same guy. And they went for it a second time, even though he was involved in the first one, because the greed overtakes the common sense. And we were working with the Colombian authorities and with the DEA in Bogota, Colombia, and they were on a wiretap at the Cali Municipal Airport. And they reported to us that after the second large seizure from Cali occurred, the flight control tower operator was killed. They blamed him. So they shot and killed him. So somebody does have to take a fall. Thankfully, it wasn't our pilots. I was able to insulate them enough, keep them safe. I never lost an informant ever. So I never lost an informant. I was very protective of that. And because that's an asset, and it's somebody's life who's helping the government. So it's very, very, I would rather lose a case than lose an informant.
So Russ, so basically whenever there's a large, seizure of drugs or, money, do you find that the days afterwards, there's like a big spike in like bodies being found?
Sometimes there is, yeah. Sometimes there is, but it's what we hear, and we're not everywhere, so we can't hear everything. But I gave you that one example of the operator of the flight control tower. He's probably sitting there eating a sandwich. And he got his head blown off.
Right, but he had nothing to do with it, right?
No, but he became a scapegoat. They had to blame somebody, so somebody's head's got to roll. So it was his.
Now they didn't actually go to the flight tower to kill him. They killed him at home or
No,
else, right?
They killed him in the flight tower to set an example.
Really? Oh my gosh. Oh.
But getting back to the price that some people pay, like I did work on a case. It wasn't my case, but it involved Whitey Bulger, and the informant the investigation was conducted by our group, but the informant was mishandled by the agents, and they pushed him too far to get too close. And if you ever read or are familiar with the Whitey Bulger case, they ended up figuring out who the informant was because our agency gave him money to go back and buy into the next big load of marijuana, and he was destitute. He was a drunk. and he showed up with $20,000, and we never saw him again. And they ended up pulling all his teeth out, his fingernails, and burying him under a parking lot in Dorchester, Massachusetts. His name was John McIntyre, and I learned a lesson from that. I would never I would never taken a chance with somebody's life like that. So, yeah, that was a sad ending to this guy's story.
No, but like, what did they do in that case that was any different than any other informer? Because I mean, when you're an informer, you're exposing yourself to like a lot of danger anyway, right?
Correct. Well, what they did in that case was they already knew that this fellow, John McIntyre, was on a boat that was transferred arms to the IRA in Ireland, several tons of weapons. And he was on a boat, the name of which was the Valhalla, and the name of the book is Valhalla's Wake. They transferred 7 tons of weapons to the Merida Ann off the coast of Ireland. The Brits tracked it and seized the weapons. The boat came back to Boston, docked here in Boston, and McIntyre wanted to cooperate. And so he was willing to give that portion up. But then at the same time, the organization that he was working for, Bulger's organization, had orchestrated the import of 36 tons of grass on a freighter vessel that was going to go Columbia to Denmark and then to Boston with the 36 tons. He gave the information up on that. So now there's 2 people involved on the gunboat, John Anderson and John McIntyre. We had heard from the FBI that Bulger had narrowed down the informant to those 2 guys, and they were leaning heavily towards McIntyre because he was a drunk. So at that same time, simultaneously, Whitey Bulger offered the opportunity for McIntyre to buy into the next load of marijuana that was coming to Boston. Now, the guy was a drunk. When we went to his safety deposit box, he had $7 in it. They knew he was a drunk, and they said, if you give us 20 grand, you can make 200,000 on the next load that comes in. So our agency gave him the 20 grand, and that was the kiss of death. So they kept fishing until he bit, and then once he bit, he was gone.
Right. So basically, they knew that he didn't have $20,000, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. No way could he ever have it. So,
Right.
So he bit.
All right. Now, what about this other case here, where you guys seized 20,000 pounds of marijuana?
That was a great case. That an informant of mine, Freddie, got a call. We were working with DEA, and DEA had a captain of a boat coming in from Columbia into Boston, and the captain would communicate with the DEA agents in Boston by radio, give him signals, or he would dock somewhere, make a phone call, and the boat, the Reba O, had 20,000 pounds of pot on it. So we had no idea where it was going to be offloaded or landing. And an old informant of mine who my agency wanted to get rid of because they didn't trust him, but he was always very good for me. He called me up one day and he said, Russ, this fellow by the name of Tommy Walsh, who was a known drug smuggler, he met with me in Braintree and he asked me if I could help refuel a boat. And it's bringing in 20,000 pounds of marijuana. And it was that boat. So we arranged the whole thing. Through Freddie, we arranged the offload. We knew what the crew was coming with the marijuana. And Freddie did a fantastic job. And he introduced me and another agent as the undercovers. And we released 1,000 pounds of the marijuana to one of the drug dealers, and he gave us $100,000. And then we had arresting the whole crew, the offload crew, and some of the people who invested in the boat. But it's all about informants. Just an informant happened to be invited to a meeting and asked to refuel a boat. And it turned into a great case.
And it turned into literally like a gold mine, right?
Yeah, correct.
Or in this case, a pot mine.
Right. Yeah. If you go back, there's an interesting sequel. Most of the first case I was talking about, the air smuggling case, that was the prosecution was overseen by Rudy Giuliani. He was the United States attorney in New York at the time, and he assigned Ann Kenner to prosecute the case. And he was enthralled with it. And I get to spend some time with him, and he was a really decent guy. And I enjoyed working with him. So I heard him on the radio after I wrote the book. He has an afternoon talk show at 3, and then sometimes he comes on at 9 o'clock at night. I called into the station and told him about the book I wrote, and he remembered the case right away. He even remembered the assistant U.S. attorney's name, and so he promised he'd read it. But I sent it to the studio, but I don't know if it never got to him. But he was a great prosecutor. What a personality!
Yep. What about this other case here, where it said that you were involved in a federal conviction of 2 Chinese nationals who were attempting to export missile tech to China?
Yeah, that was the Colin Shu case. In early 1999, an agent in our office had a friend who worked in a high-tech company in Canton, Massachusetts, that made gyroscopes for missiles. And if you're not familiar with what gyroscopes do, they guide the missile. You paint on radar where you want the missile to go to back then, 20 some odd years ago. And the gyroscope follows the signal, and the missile ends up where the gyroscope is directed to go. So the Chinese are always interested in obtaining our technology because we are number 1 in the world. So they have numerous groups of spies that are over here involved in our companies, and they try to get the items, bring them back to China, and conduct reverse technology and try and recreate the items in China. So this fellow at a company in Canton received a call from Colin Shu from Canada, who asked if he could buy a gyroscope. And so the fellow at first told him no, but then he thought about one of the agents in our office had visited and said, hey, if you ever get an inquiry like this, don't shut them down. Tell them you'll call them back. So the agent who was working the case directed him to send an email saying, yeah, he can't handle it, but he can introduce the fellow at FiberSense to an operative who could redirect the gyroscope to China. So it evolved from there. They inserted me as the undercover agent, and Colin Shu came to our undercover office in Quincy, Massachusetts for a meeting at my behest. And he sat down with me at a conference table. Everything was all videotaped and the world was wide up.
Now, you were the undercover agent in this case, right? So you were playing which part?
I was playing the bad guy who's going to, like an arms dealer, a bad guy who's going to divert something for a price outside U.S. law. So I'm going to subvert U.S. law, and for a fee, I will divert it and send it to where you want it to go, which is where most of the arms deals are done these days. So Colin came in. He was very timely, brought his briefcase in, and he had pictures of the gyroscope with him. And so now the U.S. attorney instructed me before the meeting. He said, you've got to get motive out of this guy. If he just says he wants the gyroscopes to play with in his basement, we can't prosecute him. We've got to get him to admit on tape, in video, that he's trying to use this item for a missile, and he's trying to get around the arms embargo against China. Now it's my job to get out of him what he wants the gyroscope for. So initially, I say, Colin, why do you need these things? He says, well, we have an intricate train system, and our trains are colliding in China. I said, trains are colliding? He said, yeah. He said, we want to put gyroscopes on them so they don't collide with each other. So I looked at him, I said, Colin, do you understand you want to send these things to China, and there's an arms embargo? So I got that all on tape. Then I said, and I also said to him, Colin, I have to take precautions so that I don't go to jail. And I have to lay it out to him. I said, you and I could go to jail for 10 years. Do you want me to be careful, or are you going to give me this bullshit story? So he said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, I'm done. I said, you can leave. I said, why don't you let yourself out of the office? He said, well, wait a minute. I said, I'm not going to get involved in something like this. you're an amateur. You're not leveling with me. I don't know what precautions I have to take unless you tell me what we're up against. So he said, okay, wait a minute, Mr. Russell. We want to be able to guide a missile into a bedroom window in Taiwan. I said, now we're talking, Colin. Now I know what I have to do. And thanks for being honest with me, and we'll proceed. And so we went through. He met. We arranged to meet the following week, and he gave me the money for 2 gyroscopes. It was $40,000 a piece. We went to the local post office. He put them in a package to send them back to Beijing. And once he did that and he transferred the money to me, made the letter out, handed it to the post office to mail to China, we arrested him. And then he lured his partner, his name was Yao. I can't remember Yao's last name, but he came in as well, and we arrested him too. And he was the one who was behind the whole thing.
So were they working at the behest of the Chinese government, or
Yeah, they said they were sent from Beijing University, a training school, which trains a series of spies to come over here and steal our technology.
Wow. So did the gyroscope ever get back to China?
No. Once it was passed from Colin Shu and addressed, and he paid the freight for it to be shipped express mail to China, that completed the conspiracy, and we arrested him.
And how many years is Colin serving now in prison?
he got maybe, I think he got maybe 18 months tops.
18 months? Oh,
yeah.
So that's not too bad.
No, not much of a punishment. And his partner, oh gosh, his name escapes me, begin with a Y. He got 32 months.
But like, I mean, you would think that this kind of crime would warrant a longer sentence, right?
It just wasn't taken seriously, Ron. It was looked as like a white collar, harmless, something that didn't harm anybody. And the only reason they got any time at all was because Bill Clinton's Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, was in Beijing, finalizing a $600 million missile deal to China. Guess what they didn't have? The Germans.
Right.
So she was finalizing the deal, and the New York Times broke the story. Surprisingly, they reported something negative about a Democrat. She was called back home, and the deal was canceled because the headline read in the New York Times the next day: U.S. Customs undercover sting thwarts missile deal to China. So that was the headline story the next day in the paper.
So then the deal that she was going to sign with China just kind of fell through?
Right. They didn't need no gyroscopes, no missiles.
Right. Wow. So Russ, why don't you tell us a little bit about your book, Flight of the Westwind. Okay. What is it about? Now, is this a nonfiction, or is this kind of like a summary of all your, major best cases?
No, this is just, I decided to do them one at a time based on the publisher's advice. But the case occurred in 1988, involved the 2 pilot informants that I told you about, Tony and Dennis. The book starts off with the beginning of my career, how I got into ATF, the story with Jimmy Carter and the letter, and a little bit about my parents and their background. And then initially a little bit about my career in ATF, but then focuses mainly on that air smuggling case that I conducted in 1988, which occurred in New York and was prosecuted by Rudy Giuliani's office. It was fun. It was like being involved in Miami Vice. It was a great case. It was a great case. I took a lot of chances. I chased a fugitive down in the woods by myself who was looking at 30 years on that case and had already been looking at 20 years on a RICO case from which he was a fugitive. And the ending is very good when it's me and him in the woods alone. It has a very good ending.
Okay. Now, Russell, where can our viewers and our listeners find your book if they were to buy it?
On Amazon, it sells for $14.99. And if I'm still in the video, it's here's the cover of the book, Flight of the Westwind. And it sells for $14.99 paperback, $5.99 Kindle. I got a great write-up and endorsement and recommendation from Howie Carr, who's a Newsmax contributor and a top Boston talk show host, who's written 2 bestsellers.
Now, Russ, you're also running for office right now, right? You're running for state senate in Massachusetts. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your campaign, your platform, and when is the primary?
Well, the primary is in September, but currently I am in the I'm running in Massachusetts, where the current makeup of the Senate is 33 Democrats and 7 Republicans.
Right. It's pretty dire. It's a dire situation there, right?
Yeah. I'm hoping to ride the red wave, and there's nobody else running in the primary, so I'll run unopposed in the primary, and I'll be the candidate for the party in the general election, November 8th.
Okay, and which district this is for?
This is the first Bristol and Plymouth district, which includes Fall River, my hometown of Lakeville, the adjacent town of Freetown, Rochester, Seekonk, Swansea, and Somerset.
Okay. And what made you want to run for office?
Ron, I campaigned for the greatest president in my lifetime in 2016, and again for him in 2020, President Donald J. Trump. And I became increasingly aware that the United States is heading down a very dangerous path, and we have to take hold of it. And I protected the country from drugs and terrorists for 33 years. And now it's my chance to step up and make a difference in the legislative branch by helping to push laws that keep America safe, because we're headed down a very, very dangerous path in this nation. And with no baby formula for our infants, gas prices tripled the price that they were under President Trump, and electric bills are up 15 to 20%. How are people supposed to be able to afford this? And I'm running against a candidate, or the incumbent, who shot down the reduction or suspension of the mass sales tax on gasoline of 24 cents. He called it a Republican gimmick. So I'm going to go in there and fight for the people like I did to protect them for 33 years.
Great. Russell Protentis, thank you for coming on Real Talk with Ronnie. You are a true American hero, and you've kept countless people safe during your past, 30-some years as a federal agent, right? And now you're going to continue to protect our fellow Americans in the state legislature in Massachusetts. So we wish you the best of luck on your campaign this fall. If you're watching and listening right now, if you want to check out Russell, right, is there a website that they can go to at this point in time, or?
I will have my website up next week, but in the meantime, if you want to know anything about me, just order my book online, Flight of the Westwind, W-I-N-D. And it's pretty much all in there, everything you'd want to know about me and where I come from.
Okay, so Flight of the Westwind. You can order Russell's book on Amazon. Just search for Flight of the Westwind. And next week, you were saying that your campaign site will be up and running, right?
Correct.
All right. So Russell Protentis, thank you for coming on Real Talk with Ronnie, and we'll be catching up with you very soon, okay? Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Ron. Bye-bye now.